Thank you for listening to the show on Really Big Something Channel. November 22nd, 2017.
Welcome back in, folks. Good to be here with you today at 1:05 on the Voice of Boston, WRKO. And it is a pleasure, as always. We are joined by a gentleman who represents the Institute for Policy Innovation. They like to see things going forward prospectively with growth, with free markets, and that is not happening as we move forward in the automobile industry. Because the question becomes, should the government be requiring the manufacture and sale of electric cars? Or should the free and open marketplace make that decision and allow electric cars to be sold based on public desire, not based on some artificial mandate from government? And as we know, artificial mandates from government never seem to work out anyway. And there are moves, not only in this country, but across the world, to limit the sale of fossil fuel automobiles, automobiles that operate on gasoline and oil. We're joined by Dr. Merrill Matthews, who's with the Institute for Policy Innovation. He's the resident scholar. Dr. Matthews, it's always a pleasure. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Mike. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. You too, and enjoy very much. Although I know that since your organization is based in Dallas, you've got a whole thing, you got a civil war going on in the NFL between your owner, Jerry Jones, and the whole National Football League. So good luck with that.
We do. And Jerry Jones often wins these things. He doesn't win that many games anymore, but he often wins these other things.
Well, fair enough. Now, this is an area that most people don't think about, and that's why the Institute for Policy Innovation is what it is. You bring attention to things that we should be aware of, and we're not, which is that there is a move by this government and other governments, particularly in Europe and some in Asia, to control the sale of fuel-powered automobiles to move toward electric-powered automobiles. What about that?
Well, that's right, Mike. CNN reported here just recently that China, France, Great Britain, India, Norway, and Germany are all essentially looking at banning the future production and sale of fossil fuel-powered cars. So that would be gasoline, diesel, and I presume even natural gas-powered. That's a very small market right now, but they're still out there. And then a number of other countries are setting sales targets for electric cars, and so there's about 8 other countries that have that, and then a number of states, 10 states, including Massachusetts, where you're in Boston right now, 10 states are trying to set a sales target of 15.4% of the auto sales as being electric cars by the year 2025.
Well, then how would they do that? Here in the Commonwealth, for example, are they going to tell dealerships that you can't sell more than 85% fuel-powered cars? Or
well, they can do several things. They can raise the emission standards in ways that makes it difficult for car companies to sell cars that are fossil fuel burning cars, and they have to use more electric cars to offset that. And they're following essentially California and what California's been doing in trying to push more electric and hybrid vehicles on the road. So, and the federal government's involved in this as well. You know, Barack Obama wanted to have, if I remember right, estimated there'd be 1 million electric cars on the road by the year 2015. We didn't come anywhere near that, but the federal government has policies both by handing out tax credits for buying hybrids and electric cars, and by ways to force the car manufacturers to produce more of the cars, even though they lose money for the car manufacturers.
What I don't understand, in part, is the fact that there is a huge supply, thank goodness, of fuel. We are doing very well, thank you, thanks to President Trump, because we've opened up the Dakota Access Pipeline. We've opened up, now got final approval from Nebraska, which was the final approval needed, on the XL pipeline, the Keystone pipeline, from Canada down to Houston. So we're going to have that oil. It hasn't even gotten here yet. We already have record supplies of natural gas,
right,
and we're getting a lot of fracking done So we've got a lot of fuel coming out of that, both natural gas and oil. So what's the concern? I mean, what's the big deal since we have massive amounts of the supplies that we did not have previously because President Trump has opened up that fuel supply for us? What's the issue?
Well, going back to the mid-1970s and the gasoline crisis that we had back then when OPEC imposed an embargo on the U.S. because of our Israel policies, the Congress decided we need to try to become energy independent. At that time, we had already reached what was known as peak oil. We had sort of maxed out on how much oil we were producing, and we're beginning a gradual decline. And so Congress said, well, let's do some things. Let's move to ethanol. Let's try to promote the creation and production and the sale of that. Let's move to other types of vehicles that will offset that. Let's look for ways to try to reduce our dependence upon fossil fuels so that maybe we can reach energy independence without them. But then, of course, as you point out, it's actually about a decade ago, the fracking movement really started opening up oil and natural gas. So we've had an explosion since then. We're now net exporters of natural gas, and we may be net exporters of oil before too many more years are up. But we've become the energy powerhouse of the world right now. And so, but the thinking has turned over the past 15 to 20 years, especially with Al Gore. The green energy movement has become almost a religion, and instead of saying let's try to gradually move towards a situation in which we're reducing carbon emissions, as the technology and everything improves, people will want to buy better cars, electric cars, hybrids, and so forth. They want to try to essentially force that on us quickly, and that's the problem that we're seeing right now. I have no problem with manufacturers producing electric cars and hybrids if that's what consumers want. What's happening now is that's what the government wants, and consumers want trucks and SUVs.
Well, it's ludicrous, and it's a fraud on the American people and the planet, at least in this country, because we don't have a carbon emission problem. You need carbon emissions for plants to survive. They ingest that. The way we ingest air, they ingest carbon, CO2. So that's number one. And if you're a vegan and you're a vegetarian, you only eat vegetarian foods like Bill Clinton, you ought to be in favor of carbon emissions, because if you don't have carbon emissions, you don't have plants down the road. So
that's an interesting point, because they've pointed out that with the gradual rise in carbon in the air, we've actually had an increased greening of the earth, which is exactly what you would expect. Carbon is a little over 400 parts per million right now, and that has the satellites are showing places that had not been green turning a little greener now, because that plants, as you point out, rely on carbon. In fact, the places where they grow plants and and under the roof and so forth, they actually they pump carbon in there so that the plants will grow and thrive in there.
But we also, we're talking with Dr. Merrill Matthews, by the way, at the Institute for Policy Innovation. We also know that automobiles have been made much cleaner because of these standards, using fuel. We have catalytic converters on automobiles. Those are very important in keeping control over the emissions. And so there's not a problem in that regard. Is that correct, that fuel-powered automobiles are now much cleaner?
That's absolutely right. In fact, I just have a piece out in The Hill this morning, The Hill being the Capitol Hill newspaper, on the ozone issue, and I'm pointing out in there that the government has reported that ozone. Remember, ozone used to be the big deal in the 70s when you were having smog and so forth. It has dropped by a third over the past since around 1980. And in other various emissions that have come from cars and so forth have dropped significantly, according to the EPA. So levels of carbon monoxide have fallen by 84% since 1990. Concentrations of lead have dropped by 85%. So I would argue that we've had a precipitous drop in all 6 of the ones that are considered common air pollutants, and I'd call that a success story that we've managed to do that.
By the way, as you point out, and it's very troubling. You did a piece in a syndicated column op-ed for the Tribune News Agency. Norway wants all its cars to be zero emissions by 2025. Norway's a country that's allowed illegal aliens in who are raping Norwegian women. That's okay, I guess, but they want to get rid of fuel-powered cars.
But at least they'll have clean air, they'll say.
Yeah, exactly. India wants all car and truck sales to be electric by 2030, 5 years later than Norway. France wants to get to that goal by 2040. They've got all these terrorists blowing up France, but I guess it's okay to do that as long as you have your clean cars. And Great Britain by 2050. Now, if you look at what the context is of that, as we speak, 750,000 electric vehicles were sold worldwide in 2016. 750,000 out of tens of millions, who knows how many millions around the world, for goodness sake, of automobiles that were sold. Only 750,000, a minute number. So how are they expecting to get to those numbers of electric vehicles in that reasonably short period of time?
By government power. That's all they have, and that's why I went and looked. As I mentioned in that piece, I went and looked at the sales of cars, trucks, SUVs, and electric vehicles in the U.S. So in October last month, automakers sold 1.93 million vehicles. 1.93, so nearly 2 million vehicles. About a third of them were cars. 2/3 were trucks and SUVs. Of that number, of that 2 million sold last month, the Chevrolet Bolt, it's all electric cars, sold 2,710 cars. Tesla was 1,120 cars, and the Nissan Leaf, which Nissan is out advertising and talking about all the time now, sold a whopping 213 cars out of nearly 2 million cars sold last month.
So in other words, in October, this is amazing. By the way, I drove a Chevy Volt. One of the problems with, or Bolt I should say, one of the problems is that I drove it for a week. General Motors asked me to drive the car and see what I thought of it. The problem was that you could only go 35 miles, and then you had to recharge it for 8 hours again. So it's useless. I mean, it would transfer to the gasoline nicely. You wouldn't even notice it. But you wouldn't get much electric out of it anyway.
Right.
We're not at a point where this is going to happen overnight. Look, my view is that someplace down the road, maybe in the next lifetime, when you and I are gone, we'll see these cars, electric cars out there. And but you need to have the charging stations to the same degree you have gas stations today. When you have that, that's when you can start transferring over.
My understanding is that Tesla is actually putting free charging stations in in places around the country, so that to address that problem. Now, the Tesla can go further than most electric cars, but still, if you're trying to go tomorrow's Thanksgiving. A lot of people are traveling 200, 300 miles today or more to go see family. If you have to recharge your car, you need a place to be able to do that. And Tesla's putting in these sort of super-powered chargers that'll take, I think you can get like half a charge in 20 or 30 minutes, something like that, so much faster than it would be out of your garage. But even still, you'd have to go and look and see where those places are and make sure you can make it there. So that's a real problem challenging the car makers. Day may come where the technology improves so that you can get 300 or 400 miles out of a charge. That would certainly help, but we're not there yet.
Well, the other part of the problem is that the government is giving people incentives, financial incentives, to buy electric vehicles. And in spite of that, they're still not doing it, but we, the taxpayers, are paying for people to buy cars and then get a tax break, a rebate of some sort, because people bought an electric car.
Right. There's a tax credit of up to $7,500 for buying qualified cars in that allow for that tax break, generally either electric or hybrid cars. So, yes, the taxpayers are funding it, but these cars are fairly expensive. I mean, if you go to the Chevy Bolt website, it shows you how much the cars are, and it highlights the fact that the base price of a Chevy Bolt, that's their all-electric car, is $37,495, but they say on the website, on the Bow website, you can get it for $29,995 after the federal tax credit. So taxpayers chipping in there, and the vote and the picture they have on there actually was one that cost $42,700. But of course, the big expensive one is the Tesla, which a lot of people love. I actually went for a ride. A friend has a Tesla, and I went for a ride in his Model S, 3 or 4 weeks ago. Thought it was very nice. It's a beautiful car, but they start at $70,000, and the median household income, Mike, the median household income is $59,000 before taxes. You take taxes out, and you can just barely afford a Chevy Bolt, much less a Tesla for the median family.
No question about that. We'll come right back and pick it up there. With us is Dr. Merrill Matthews of the Institute for Policy Innovation. The question, folks, should the government be telling you to buy electric cars? Should they be telling automobile manufacturers in this country to make and produce and manufacture electric cars? Should the European countries and some of those Asian countries be doing the same? Is there a crisis on this planet that requires electric cars at the moment, or should we let the free marketplace make the decision? Number to Boston is 617-266-6868. Mike Siegel for Jeff Kuhner at the Voice of Boston, WRKO at 121. 124 in the afternoon. Mike Siegel for Jeff Kuhner at the Voice of Boston, WRKO. Don't forget to check out online my column at WRKO.com on the Roy Moore and Al Franken situations. Do that column every week on different subjects. Hope you take a look. And my book, Airing the Wave on Talk Radio, the power of talk radio campaigns I've been involved in over the years. Again, it's called Airing the Wave, available online at Amazon and Barnes & Noble and elsewhere. Let's go to your calls for Dr. Merrill Matthews, whether we should be having the government tell car manufacturers build electric cars. I mean, where's the problem? They're solving a problem that does not exist, folks. Let's go to Paul and Dedham, first of all. Paul, you're on WRKO. Hello.
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Good.
I agree with you. I think it's ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. What are you going to do about the poor working guy that has a car, say 5, 6 years old, and he wants to keep it 10 years? Is he going to be able to get gas? So, no, if you're going to force him to buy an electric car, and they're not cheap. Yeah, you're saving gas, but you're paying $60,000 for the car. It's ridiculous.
Well, you're right. But you can pay as little as maybe $30,000 for a Chevy Bolt. But Dr. Matthews, how many miles do you get on the electric now before you have to charge it?
It varies with the cars. I actually looked at this a little while back, and most of them run around in the little less than 100, a little more than 100. And what Tesla was able to do was to get that significantly higher. So that was the beauty of the Tesla. But
and it's also, as you said, at least 70,000.
Yeah, that's right. In fact,
I have a friend who bought their SUV for about $130,000, actually.
Riding with my friend in that Tesla, I said, these things start about $70,000, don't they? And he said, well, this one's $110,000. He said, you can get one, but that's the stripped down model. He said, they have one that's about $125,000, but I thought that was too expensive. And I said, well, I think I agree with you there. But
no question.
Right.
So you're talking 100 miles. So now you look. The point here is the cars are clean. The catalytic converters, the way they're designed, they meet standards and emission standards. You don't need. If you want to get an electric car, God bless you, but you don't need one. And actually, my friend bought one who lives in the Boston area. He paid, I think, $75,000. But the problem is, how many years is it going to take for no gas cost to catch up to what he would have paid, let's say, $30,000 or $25,000 for a normal car? How many years is it going to take to make up that $40,000 or $50,000 in gas that's no charge?
And you know, the other question is, does a person who can buy a $100,000 car need middle income? Do they need Paul paying part of that $7,500 tax credit so they can have a really nice car that they like?
Let's go to Paul and Raynham. Paul, you're on WRKO. Hello.
Good morning, guys. You know, there's a variety of things that I think that are missing this. Yes, your gas costs are lower, but you realize electricity's not free, right?
Right.
So these things aren't being charged for nothing. So you're paying one way or the other. You're just not paying one big company to pay a different big company. Secondly, you know, this is the problem with our government. You know, it started a while ago where the government used to dream big and inspire big. You know, when the space program, we wanted to get to the, you know, we were going to get to the moon by the end of the decade. But there was not this, you know what, private industry is going to be forced, and regular citizens are going to be forced to sacrifice here, there, and the other where so that we can do this. Now, the government doesn't worry about the infrastructure or the steps that it takes to accomplish a goal. They dictate the goal and then let us figure out how we're going to do it in the process. I mean, a current example is the legalizing marijuana. Okay, now it's legal. But we didn't worry about how we're going to make that actually infrastructurally work for driving and selling and, you know, keeping it away from the kids and all that stuff. We just said, oh, here's the end result, forced and passed. Same thing with these electric cars. We're going to force this, and then we're not going to worry about the fact that, okay, if you forced half the cars to be electric, if it takes you a half hour to charge, now it bothers me when I got to wait a minute and a half for somebody to pump their gas so that I can pump my gas. What if I have to wait for him for a half hour so that I can charge my car for a half hour?
That's right. You know, that's a good point. Because if you have a charging station, thank you for calling, Paul. If you have a charging station, well, let's say I've seen them in garages, you know, where you park your car in your garage and they have a couple of charging stations. You get two cars in there and they go in there with the Bolt. For me, it had to be 8 hours. I don't know how long it is to charge it up to get a good charge, but you wind up not getting access to it. Whereas at a gas station, even if I go to Costco to get gas, even if there are 6 or 7 cars in line, it takes you maybe 10 minutes. It's not going to take you 10 minutes to charge a car with electric. We'll come right back. Dr. Matthews, can you stay with us?
I can.
I appreciate it. We got calls on the line, and we've got calls coming in. Open line as well at 617-266-6868. Let's get your calls. Should we be forced to buy electric cars by the government? Mike Siegel for Jeff Kuhner at the Voice of Boston, WRKO. Here we go, folks. 1:35 it is, and a good afternoon at the Voice of Boston, WRKO. Mike Siegel in. We go back with Dr. Merrill Matthews, Institute for Policy Innovation, and your calls on whether the government should tell you, hey, Dino or Jim or Gene or Harry or Tom, all of you on the line, you got to buy an electric car. Should that be what the government's role ought to be? We go to Dino in East Bridgewater. You're on with Mike Siegel for Jeff Kuhner at WRKO. Dino, go ahead.
Hey, happy Thanksgiving. No,
Thank you.
I don't believe that the government should tell us what to buy. I think it's a big game with them. It's like ethanol in Massachusetts. We're the only state, really, that we don't even require it, but most gas stations use ethanol. And we're destroying all of our electronics, all of our motors because of ethanol, which kind of stinks. But the battery thing with the cars, too, is kind of a question, because when you take these batteries, I get drills that after a little while the batteries start going down and they end up stuck and you can't do nothing with the drill anymore. How soon before the batteries die? You have to charge the batteries, which just takes energy from one point and brings it to another point. So it changes it from whatever they're doing, coal, whatever they want to use to make electricity now, and it's taking it from one to the other, but it's still polluting. You know?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Thank you for calling. And Dr. Matthews, on the question of the battery life, you got to keep recharging it. Batteries die at some point. What's the lifespan of one of these batteries, and what's the cost? Because it's prohibitive.
You know, I have seen that in the past, and I don't remember right now what it is. I do remember car dealers telling me, and this has been a little while back, that the electric vehicles and hybrids had bad resale value. Because number one, not that many people wanted it. You didn't get the tax credit on the resale, and then once the battery went out, then you had to expend a lot of money. My recollection, it was in the $5,000 or $6,000 range to replace the battery. So it was a chunk of money. And you know, Paul mentioned a minute ago that the cars have to be powered by electricity. We have to create that electricity. That's generally done by either coal or natural gas, increasingly natural gas. But of course, there's a number of states are pushing clean energy, either wind power or solar power. And Massachusetts, there for a while, they were pushing the Cape Wind project. Was it 180 or so windmills off the Nantucket Sound that Ted Kennedy apparently kept from going forward because he didn't want that in his backyard until he passed away. He was able to get But they're in the last couple of years, it finally died a couple of years ago. I think it's sort of in litigation or something now. But they went, and the Obama administration gave them $930 million to be able to keep that project going. That was around 2014 or 15, I think, and then the electricity was still going to be 50% higher for the rate for the people who were using electricity because it was so expensive. So the project finally fell apart.
Yeah, no, and that's where we've gone with these things. He puts money into all these green projects, and it's taxpayer money that gets lost. Jim in Attleboro, you're on WRKO, the Voice of Boston, with our guest, Dr. Merrill Matthews. Hello.
Hi, Mike. Great show. Hey, there were two things. One, George W. Bush, when he put those special light bulbs basically around the country, was it LEDs? He has saved the country tons and tons of energy. That's number one. But number two, I wanted to find out was that on these Teslas and the Bolts, I heard it only cost about $14 to $16 a week to fuel these, and that's quite a savings compared with what a gasoline engine does for you. But I just wanted to know if you had an opinion on any of that, and also on the George W. Bush with the LCD lighting that basically don't give off any heat, and they've changed them over. I think it was the Philips company with George W. Bush that did that in the early 2000s. That made a great difference as far as saving energy.
Yeah, those Philips light bulbs are very good. Dr. Matthews, go ahead.
Well, the light bulbs, yes, but a lot of people didn't like them, and they were also quite a bit more expensive. It has been a little while since I looked at in essence, miles per charge on the electric cars, but I think Jim is essentially right. It's much less expensive. What Paul was trying to point out a little earlier, I think, was that the electricity that comes out of the wall doesn't just happen. It actually takes, for the most part, fossil fuels to create that. So you're substituting one for the other. And if you're using a coal plant, you're actually creating significantly more emissions. That's why one of the reasons why so many plants, electricity plants, have moved over to natural gas, because it emits about half the carbon that coal plants do. But as you pointed out earlier, Mike, our cars have gotten so clean on these things that it's we're certainly emitting some carbon, but not nearly what it was years ago.
Let's turn to Gene in Arlington. You're on WRKO, Gene. Hello.
Hi. Hello. Thanks for taking my call. I think
Sure.
Some of the people before me used one of my points, which was, doesn't filthy, dirty coal have to be used to produce most of our electricity, first of all? And also, as far as how long a charge will last, what if you're only going 10 miles, but it takes you 90 minutes? And in the Boston area, that happens quite frequently. Mm-hmm. If you are in a totally electric car, what would happen?
That's a good question. What happens, Dr. Matthews, if the car just stops running?
You got to have a truck come out and give you a charge.
No, is that a possibility? I'm not. I don't pretend to know that much about electric cars. But I was just curious about that, because I heard you mention something about 10 miles or 30 miles or whatever. And I was just curious, if you're literally just there idling for most of, 90 minutes, what would happen? Would you...
No, you're right, Gene. Thank you for calling. Dr. Matthews, that's a problem, because I hadn't even thought of it, because you could think you're on an open highway and everything's great, and everybody's moving at 60, 65 miles an hour, and then all of a sudden an accident comes up,
right.
And now everybody's sitting there in gridlock, not going anywhere, and your car is running on the electric, and then it runs out. Now you got to get a truck to come out there and maybe tow you or charge you, but the charge would take a while, so that's right. Another problem, and you're tying up the traffic because of that.
Absolutely right, and that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people are reluctant to move to them. We saw a picture last night. I think it was in L.A. Where it was a beautiful picture at night, where you saw a white stripe and a red stripe as cars were absolutely stopped on a highway, and they took a helicopter picture of it. It was beautiful, but it was all these people who were stopped on the highway, and it was thousands and thousands of them. And if you ran out of electricity, you'd be in if your battery ran down, you'd be in trouble at that point, because sometimes happens. So it is a problem with that, and until they address that problem by improving the technology or increasing the access to charging stations, you're going to and being able to do it fairly quickly, it's going to be a real hindrance for people to buy those.
Let's go to Dave in New Hampshire. You're on the Voice of Boston, WRKO. Dave, hello.
Hello, how are you?
Very well.
Well, one thing about electric cars, they don't idle. When you stop, the motor stops, and so it doesn't use any power. It's just like a radio-controlled car. It's basically distant.
Is that true?
If you have your lights on and your wipers running and stuff like that, okay?
And if you have the air conditioner or heater on.
The engine uses, it doesn't use any when you're sitting still.
Is that true when it idles? There's no power coming out of it?
No, you still have air conditioning and heating. You have radio and lights, as he said. So if you dramatically diminish it if you're in daylight and you're stopping and you don't have those other things going on. But you still will drain it some if you have, because there's functions in the car, the computer's running and other things that, in fact, in the Tesla, it's got a huge computer screen, looks like it's turned sideways there, where the dash is normally sort of in the middle between the seats, but it's drawing some power. It's just not drawing nearly as much.
Dave, appreciate it.
So you still have your plenty of early warning before you'd run out of distance, you know? So, not that I'm a big fan of electric, because energy is energy. You're still going to make the electricity, and then you're still going to transport it to the car, via wires and transformers and chargers and all the other happy crap. So, you know what I mean? I just think the closer you are to the source of energy, the more efficient it'll be.
No, but and good point, David. Thank you. But the real point is not about trying to diminish electric cars. If somebody wants to buy one, God bless them. The point is of this whole conversation that the government's trying to step in and tell you to buy them, and telling the car manufacturers to build them. That's the point.
That's right, and that's what's happening. Is they're doing several things. I don't think it'll be so much on the Trump administration, but on the Obama administration, trying to force us to shift over those. And of course, several other countries are doing so as well. Ironically, Germany is one big windmill, but after the Fukushima nuclear plant catastrophe, 4 or 5 years ago, Germany sort of cut down its nuclear and started going back to coal, sort of offsetting the benefits it thought it was getting from all the windmills.
Let's go to Tom in New Jersey at WRKO. Hello, Tom.
Hey, Mike. Blessed Thanksgiving to both of you.
Thank you.
Mike, this is what all this is a disguise of big, gargantuan government getting involved in our lives. The Constitution says limited government. The left has built this farce on a lot of junk science about CO2, about the planet warming. I drove to Indiana recently. I see my beautiful farmland covered with windmills that don't even get enough wind to move. I see solar panels blanketing our nation, where you drive or walk in what used to be beautiful open space, and you get blinded by these metallic structures destroying our country. Out in the ocean, they have windmills. The left are a bunch of loons. In large part, Mike, electricity doesn't fall from the sky. It's got to be created by oil-powered plants or coal, or, God forbid, the nuclear, which is highly, highly dangerous. And we have nowhere in all these years of nuclear, we have no way of dealing with the waste. We put it back in the ground, and we hope it doesn't contaminate us. This is a lot of junk science, Mike, and it's modern-day communism.
I agree with you completely, Tom. Thank you. It is. I mean, the bottom line of this, the premise, number one, the government shouldn't be directing automobile manufacturers to build electric cars. Number two, the premise on which they want these companies to build those electric cars is false. We do not have a human contribution problem to any kind of global warming or climate change problem?
Well, the Earth's been warming since the last ice age, and that's generally considered 10 to 11,000 years ago. It's been on a gradual warming trend. The question now is whether or not humans are exacerbating that or not. I think that's you could make the case that they're adding to it a little bit, but as you point out, if you increase carbon, that actually has that has a greening effect on the world. One of the things that Tom didn't mention, though, is that the wind farms are bird-killing machines. My little breakfast table, I've got a bird bath out there because I love to watch the birds come and take a bath. We get cardinals and blue jays and so forth in there. But these wind farms just wipe out birds. They even President Obama had to give them a special dispensation because they kill so many raptors, including eagles, that if you were an individual going out and doing that, you'd be in jail for life.
There you go. That's a very important point. That this has been costly to try to do this fraudulent activity of pretending that human beings are causing problems of global warming or climate change. Harry in New Hampshire, you're on WRKO. Hello, Harry.
Hi, everybody, and happy Thanksgiving in advance, everyone. Hey, I just want to circle back on the battery technology, the charging stations. Doctor, the charging stations that are out there and the way that we charge the batteries in the electric vehicles, I think, is a little bit of just a little bit of a Band-Aid. I've kind of surmised over the years that if the electric vehicle technology is going to get to the point where it's going to be price competitive and popular with consumers, no one's going to want to wait in line 10 minutes to charge their car. Say you're 2 or 3 humans behind waiting, that's 30 minutes. That's just not going to happen. So in my mind, I've kind of put a picture together where you would have two batteries in your vehicle. One would be running the vehicle while the other one is charging off the one that's running. And like a fuel gauge, you'd have like a energy gauge. When it gets down to the point where you need to change over to the other battery, you would just flip a switch or press a button, and it would automatically just default to the other battery that's fully charged, and then that would start charging the other one. So you could virtually go cross-country without ever having to stop for a charge.
Well, Harry, I think the Chevy Volt sort of goes along that lines, which it has a small gas-powered engine in there, as I recall, that charges the battery so that you can continue going, and you don't necessarily have to stop. But that, and of course the Prius, you drive on the battery, and once the battery runs out, it has a sort of a seamless transition over to fossil fuel, and you do that, and you dramatically increase your mileage. And if you're just staying around locally, you're using the electric part of it. So that seems to me like a good solution for things right now. What's interesting is that the governments want to try to push us to the all-electric vehicles, which create a lot more problems that they haven't been able to solve yet.
We'll come right back with Dr. Merrill Matthews and your calls at 617-266-6868 at the Voice of Boston, WRKO. Back we are. Good to have you with us at 1:55. I'll ask you to be brief if you can so that we get everybody in on the question of the government demanding that we buy electric cars at some point down the road. What do you make of it? Ed in Boston, you're on WRKO. Hello there.
Yeah, hello, Mike. How you doing?
Good.
It's great to hear you.
Thank you.
I wanted to bring up Elon Musk. This guy is the biggest hustler going, and so is in electric cars. Do you know that all his cars are subsidized until he hits a certain limit, that when he finally reaches, I think it's 200,000 cars plus, or maybe even more, then he starts to pay taxes, or he starts to pay on his cars. They are basically, for him, free, even though he's selling them for, $100,000 a pop?
About that, a few less, but and some more than that too. Appreciate it. Thank you. What about that benefit to Elon Musk at Tesla?
One of the real benefits. Elon Musk is a genius, not only in technology and so forth, but in being able to use government subsidies. Most of the other car companies have to buy credits from him because they exceed their amount of carbon emissions. So since none of his cars have any carbon emissions, they have to buy credits from him. And it was reported, I think, a year or two ago that Tesla made a profit, but the reason it made a profit was him selling clean energy credits to other companies. You can call it a scam, but it's a government position that allows him to not sell many cars and actually make some money.
Henry in New Hampshire, you're on WRKO, sir. Go right ahead.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
I've always had this question, and I haven't seen anybody ever do a study, and I challenge them. Windmills, okay, take energy out of the wind, right?
Yep.
And the wind is a normal function of the planet, right? What is the climate change effect on taking energy out of the wind?
Hey, that's a good question. Thank you for calling. Dr. Matthews?
I would say there's very little climate change effect of taking energy out of the wind because it's only moving things as the wind goes through. So it doesn't stop the wind. The wind just continues to go and it moves the blades. So I'd say there's not much there. However, it takes a lot of energy to build those things and to transport them to where they have to be, just as ethanol takes a lot of energy to carbon emissions to grow the corn, get the corn to the refineries, have it refined, and then ship it to the gasoline refineries so it can be mixed in. It takes a lot of carbon emissions to do that.
Ronald and Lynn, you got 30 seconds, sir. Go right ahead.
Get.
Well, that's nice. Thank you. Russ in Boston, you got 25 seconds. Go ahead.
Seriously, I'm sick and tired of listening to the environment Nazis. And the second thing is, anytime the United States government gets involved in anything in the free market capitalist system, you either get screwed right away or you get screwed down the road. There was no.
Thank you, sir. That's a great way to end. Dr. Matthews, 30 seconds. Go right ahead.
Well, Michael, I just I love hearing those Boston accents all the way down here in Texas. Thanks so much, and happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you as well. We appreciate it, and that last call was really a good summary. And we'll come back on the other side of the news with Ira Melman, the Director of Media Relations for the Federation for American Immigration Reform. Some outrageous things happening on immigration in these sanctuary cities. We'll talk about that and much more, trying to take our country back under Donald Trump and the legitimate conservative Republicans. Mike Siegel for Jeff Kuhner at the Voice of Boston, WRKO.
The Voice of Boston is you. 680 WRKO Boston, 93.7 WEEI HD2 Lawrence, Boston. It's 2 o'clock.